Welcome to Bruce C. TV. I'm your host, Bruce C. And this channel is dedicated to telling stories about all those people and places, the situations and circumstances that make life worth living. I love telling stories about I love telling stories and hearing stories that are emotionally connected, things that grab you and really stick with you. Those are my favorite. I call them adventures of the heart. Now, I love to tell stories. I think I'm a little bit better writing stories, however. In fact, I have a novel out. It's called A Kiss, a Little Consequence. It's based on my life back in the day when I was a tour guide, one of my many past lives. It chronicles the adventures of travel guide Parker Moon and his pursuit of love as he travels the world looking for that one true love. I'll leave a link in the description box. We won't talk about that anymore, but I'll leave a link in the description box about that so you can check it out. I'm back in my hometown of Lyons, Illinois, back at my hometown parish, St. Hugh. Not to tell a story today though about St. Hugh or about Lyons. I'd like to go to tell a story that took place at a different time in a different church. It was back in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Back a while back when I was first married. My first wife was from Atlantic City, New Jersey. We got married at Our Lady Star of the Sea Church, much like this church. Anyhow, so we were married. I was a tour guide back then. I loved my job. I think, unfortunately, I love my job more than I love my marriage because when that next tour came, I went, and eventually so did she. But we stayed close, and I loved her whole family, especially her mother. I remember her mother was an amazing woman. She was Lebanese. She was from the upper echelon or the upper class of Atlantic City. They're the folks with the money. They had some jewelry stores on the boardwalk, and she was a very classy lady. But she was just beautiful. She had this beautiful V-shaped face with dark, deep-set eyes, and she wore her hair always in a bouffant, like always up. And she just had a commanding presence and a glow about her that I just had always loved and admired. She used to tell me that she never wanted to go on vacation. She never wanted to go anywhere. She grew up in Atlantic City, and I remember she would say that living in Atlantic City was like living in Disney World, and that she didn't need to go anywhere else. She had married her husband, Lou. He was Italian. He came from the other side of the tracks. He was, from the poor side of town. And the thing I loved about Lou, he was just a jolly guy. He was a butcher at A&P, but he was just a jolly guy, and he loved to catch those little blue crabs. He'd catch those live blue crabs, and he'd go home and he'd make tomato sauce, pasta sauce with crabs. He called it crab gravy. And I remember Lou and we connected, and I loved eating Lou's crab gravy. No one else in the family would eat crab gravy. No one would touch it except me. And so here, when I'd be there, and Lou and I would be, we have a beer on, and we'd be splattering tomato gravy all over, ripping up these crabs and eating pasta, and I could still see Lou grabbing the big jug of cheap wine and pouring me a glass full and enjoying a great meal with him. So anyhow, after a few years, I was divorced and still close to my ex-wife and the family. But I remember Lou passed away. He had a heart attack, and he had passed away, and he had struggled, hung on for a few weeks. And when he finally passed, I remember the family asked me to come on out and, help them with the services, which of course I was glad to do. I remember specifically though, we were at church just like this, Our Lady Star of the Sea Church, and I remember my ex-wife and my brother-in-law, and they were up in front talking to the priest, and I was in the back behind them with my mother-in-law, and she was wearing this wool coat, this gray heavy wool coat with a short fur collar on, and she had her her all cuddled all up. And while they were making the arrangements to bury her husband, she elbowed me and nodded for me to follow her. So I did, and we came out the stairs and walked around the side of the church, and it was 3-4 o'clock, maybe dusk, but it was winter, December, and the wind was blowing and the snow was blowing down the sidewalk, down the street, and we came around, went along the side of the church. It was a narrow sidewalk, and she cozied up against the church wall. And I remember, I don't remember exactly if we were up against brick or whatnot, but I remember it was a very perfect spot for two people to get shoulder to shoulder and just get out of the wind. And we cozied up there, and the first thing I thought of was, how many times in her life had she done that? And she took out a cigarette, and I could imagine her sneaking away to have a cigarette up against the church often. So we stood there, didn't say a word, and she had that cigarette out, took her lighter out. I took her lighter, put the cigarette in her mouth, and I lit the cigarette. And she took a drag, and she looked off, and I didn't say anything to her. I didn't know what to say. And then I remember she took another drag, and she looked at her cigarette, and she said, when I was a little girl, my mother told me there are 2 things you should never do. She took another drag. She said, never smoke cigarettes and never go to Ducktown. Now, Ducktown was the Italian neighborhood. So she took another cigarette, another drag, and she said, on my 16th birthday, I bought a pack of Luckies and met my husband, Lou. I love that woman. She was an amazing person, and my life is better off for knowing her. And that's what I consider an adventure of the heart. So if you enjoyed that story, please check your post notifications so you'll be notified when we drop the next video, and to be continued.
Thank you for subscribing to Bruce C. TV. Here's some more information on my novel, A Kiss of Little Consequence.